We've been looking on page 1 in our Bibles to look at some essential truths together. We're just looking at 3 in Genesis chapter 1. And in last episode, we looked at the idea that God speaks. In this episode, we're looking at the idea that God sees. So Genesis 1, verse 1, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." Okay, did you catch it? Verse 4, "And God saw that the light was good." This is going to be a pattern, a rhythm that reverberates through not just Genesis 1, but through the rest of the Bible. But in Genesis 1 particularly, we're going to see that God saw, and God saw, and God saw that it was good. And the seventh time, God saw that it was very good. See, God's not just speaking the world into creation through the word of his power and then stepping back, checking out. No, he's intensely interested in what he's made, and he is measuring things with his eye. He is evaluating. And because he is the creator, God is the only right evaluator of what is good and bad. Now, each of us has our own opinion. We have our own perspective on the world, our own worldview. And so we've got our own ideas maybe about what is right and wrong. And we don't have to read too much further. We just get to page 3, where people, creatures, are reevaluating creation, and we're determining that what God said is death, in fact, is good. And we sort of run into some problems. And so, as we continue to read through the rest of the Bible, again, this rhythm reverberates, it repeats itself again and again. We come to a passage like Genesis chapter 6, where evil that we have clung to, thinking that this is good, it also begins to amplify. And so in Genesis 6, verse 5, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." But the Lord didn't just see, again, he cares. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. But keep reading. In verse 8, "Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." See, God is looking, and he's evaluating, and he's caring about the world that he made. Later in Genesis 16, there's a woman named Hagar. She's been cruelly treated, and she's struggling to respond as she should. And then God meets her there in the wilderness. And in Genesis 16, verse 13, Hagar calls God El Roi. That is the God who sees, because she knows that this is a God who cares. See, nobody is a nobody to God. Now, later in Exodus 2, God sees his people, and when Israel, as a family, a nation, is in bondage in Egypt, they're crying out to God, and in verse 24 of Exodus 2, it says that God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. This is a God who sees and who knows and who cares, and he's evaluating right and wrong. And so when we experience wrong in this world, God sees it and he cares. And so a God who sees can be a tremendous comfort to us, but it can also be a terror, because sometimes it's me who's committing the wrong. And so we might prefer at times to hide in the darkness. The darkness, though, is what we know from Genesis 1, page 1 of our Bibles, to be a chaotic place, a empty place. And John, writing later in the Gospel of John, speaking of Jesus, he writes, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." In Psalm 139, David writes about the knowledge that God has of us. He says, "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you." God God sees us wherever we are, whatever we're doing. And in verse 6, David, thinking about the kind of intimate knowledge that God has of him, he says, "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it." See, we don't live this life as we should because we don't understand it, and we don't even see ourselves as we truly are. We have different desires and different wants that we elevate to needs. We live for purposes that we've determined for ourselves, all apart from the God who knows exactly what life is, and we don't see it, but God does. God does. On page 1 of our Bibles, God turns on the light. And he's still turning on the light for those who would see.